Welcome to SAP and Azure. Power BI Deep Dive into SAP Connectivity. Power BI connecting to SAP HANA. Power BI connecting to SAP BW. My name is Ross Laforte. I am the SAP Solution Specialist for Microsoft. Power BI is a business analytics service that runs on Azure to allow you to transform your company's data with rich visuals and analytics, so you can spot the trends as they happen and push your business further. It's composed of 4 different components. The Power BI service, which runs on Azure, allows you to host dashboards and reports and securely share with other users. S provides you scalability and high availability. With there's a mobile app component which allows you to use iOS and Android devices to visually see your reports and dashboards. In addition, there's a Power BI for developer, which allows developers to embed Power BI in their application. And then there's the Power BI desktop, which is the authoring tool for Power BI. It allows you to author reports and then publish them to Power BI service to be shared securely with the users. The Power BI service, which runs in Azure, connects to the data sources, like on-prem data sources, or data sources in a different VNet, through the Power BI gateway, which is the on-premise data gateway. With the on-premise data gateway, what it does, it creates a pipe, encrypted pipe between the Power BI service and the VNet, where the data source lives, and allows that connectivity to happen so that data from the data source can be accessed. And then the Power BI service could share those reports and dashboards with other applications. And then you see here the Power BI desktop publishes reports to the service. And in addition to that, Power BI service has connectors to other business applications in the cloud as well. So the on-premise data gateway is a multi-user gateway that supports connecting to many different on-premise data sources. And the gateway, when we say the on-premise data sources, to be more clear about that, the ability of the gateway is to allow different a data source in a different VNet to be connected to Power BI service. So it could be on-premise, or it could be running a VM on Azure. You would need the data gateway to create the pipe between the two environments. And the data gateway is something you download from PowerBI.com. You need it to install on a Windows VM, and the Windows VM should be deployed near the data source so that you have low latency. In addition to installing the data gateway on the VM, you also need to install the driver to connect to SAP. For example, connecting to SAP HANA, the VM needs to also have the SAP HANA driver. If you're connecting to SAP BW, it needs to have the BW driver. Okay, and this same gateway that supports Power BI is also used by Power Apps, by Power Automate, and by Azure Logic Apps. It's through this on-premise data gateway, Power BI could directly query the data source. So as the user is navigating the reports, Power BI submits queries to the SAP environment and queries and brings the data back to satisfy the report usage. And also supports schedule refreshes, where you could refresh data on a scheduled basis. So on a scheduled basis, Power BI submits a query, pulls the data, saves it in the report. Through the SAP, through this on-premise data gateway, we support single sign-on with SAP. And single sign-on means is that we connect to SAP HANA with Kerbals and SAML, and single sign-on with SAP BW using Kerbals, both running in DirectQuery mode. So which means it's a user in Power BI connecting to the Power BI service could pass its credentials to SAP, and SAP could return the data that that user has access to see based on the credentials passed to it. In order for single sign-on to be enabled, here's a screenshot of the Power BI service the on-premise data gateway configuration. If you want to configure for single sign-on, use Kerbals, you click here, and if you want to configure for SAML, you click here. Okay. Additionally, there's additional information here to an overview on how to connect using Kerbals, how to use SAML. Notice that the on-premise data gateway could be used by SAP. HANA BW could be used by other data sources as well. The requirement is that it has to have a driver to connect to the data source. Now we are going to talk about two different connectivity options for Power BI, connected to SAP HANA and connecting to SAP Business Warehouse Connector. The SAP Connects HANA Connector uses the ODBC-based driver to connect to the HANA database. And the SAP BW Warehouse uses a NetWeaver-based driver to connect to the application layer. You need to download these drivers directly from the SAP Marketplace. Now, let's first talk about the SAP HANA Connector. It's a specialized connector for SAP HANA. It supports HANA informational models, both analytics and calculated views. It also supports row and column in a table queries. It's optimized for the navigation for HANA models and supports two different modes of operations: relational and multidimensional. It has a rich support for native SAP concepts like hierarchies and additive measures and default variable values. It supports importing data, and it supports direct query modes. It accesses the data sources through the on-premise data gateway, and it supports single sign-on for direct queries with Kerbals and with SAML. It's built on top of the SAP HANA ODBC driver, and it's officially certified by SAP for HANA. The HANA Connector has the two modes, a relational and multidimensional mode for direct query. In multidimensional mode, it's a cube, aggregated cube, and so the data is already aggregated and basically very fast performance. It supports the hierarchies because of the cube with parent-child hierarchies. It supports SSL, and correctly treats non-additive measures. So it's a high performance 2D multidimensional model using the HANA multidimensional mode. The relational mode provides you with more flexibility as a row column in a table, and supports the data modeling operations like calculated columns, like measures, composite modeling support. Okay, how you enable the two different options is by going to the options of of Power BI, DirectQuery options, and clicking the Treat SAP HANA as a relational mode source for relational, or uncheck it for multidimensional. Okay, let's go and look at that. So you go to File, Options here, and you click on DirectQuery. When it's clicked, Treat SAP HANA as a relational source means now I'm treating it as a row, column, and a table level with regular SQL. When I uncheck that, then it's treating the data source as a multidimensional cube aggregated solution. So the M function that allows you in Power BI Query, the M function allows you to connect to SAP HANA. So if you go to the within Power BI, you go to the Power Query, the SAP HANA database with the server name and the port name, and then you can also provide a SQL statement here that allows you to connect to SAP HANA, and it supports both database level authentication with user and password, and Windows authentication with single sign-on. Okay, let's quickly show where that's those options. So basically, the query is provided by this information that I will provide here. And give it a second, bring it up. This is the SAP HANA Connector. Now, in order for you to be able to connect to SAP HANA, the computer where Power BI desktop is running on needs to have the SAP HANA driver installed, which I do here. So when I do this, I click Connect. It prompts me for the information, server name, the port, and if you want to do a custom port, you can also do that here. It also prompts you if you want to do import mode or query mode, and you can put a SQL statement. Now, the reason as you can see here, I am connected as a relational mode, and so a SQL statement here is just a regular SQL statement accessing row, column, table. So in this case, what we're going to do now is let's go into the SAP HANA Connector Demo and explore connecting to SAP HANA. Okay, so here I am inside of an SAP Power BI for HANA report. Power BI retail sales from SAP HANA with a direct query. So I'm directly querying the data source as I navigate this report. And you can notice here it's set up a direct query as well here. Shows us direct query. So as I navigate this report and I click something, it actually goes and queries the data source and pulls the data in. And if I change, let's say I'm changing a slicer, it just goes up and requeries the data as it needs it. So this is all done interactively as I navigate. It reaches out to for the data it needs to support that that data. And here's I'm going to show you. I'm going to just pull the data, refresh the data. As you can see, the data is coming from the SAP environment. And notice now that if I go into the model, it's just a relational model. There's just the schema. There's no data here. The data is pulled in because it's in direct query mode. The data is pulled in as needed. If this was import, there would be another tab here that would hold the data. Okay. So now let's talk about the SAP Business Warehouse Connector. It's a specialized connector for SAP BW, supports BW 7.x plus. It has ability to connect to both the application server and the message server. And is able to connect to info cubes and query cubes, including BEX queries. It is a multidimensional connector that supports accurately the hierarchies and variables of the cube. It also supports displaying names, technical names for easier navigation, as well as variables, hierarchies, hierarchy nodes, member properties. It supports import mode and direct query. So you can import the data into the report, or it could directly query the data source as the user navigates the report. It also supports access. It also supports the on-premise data gateway to allow it to connect to the data source, and supports single sign-on or Kerberos authentication. It's built on top of the SAP NetWeaver RFC, certified by SAP, and you want to use implementation 2.0, which is a higher performance version of the driver, and it's built on top of the SAP.NET Connector 3.0, which is officially certified by SAP for BW. Now, when you connect to the SAP BW Connector, and you go to, and within Power BI, you go to the Power Query, you see an SAP BW Warehouse.cubes function, and that allows you to put in the parameters. That has the parameters to connect to SAP. Native query, if you want to actually add an MDX, or if not, you're just going to bring in the navigator and you can pick and choose the cube. The language. A couple other things I want to point out: the batch size. It has the capability to change the batch size. You want to query bring in and retrieve one time, and it has different execution modes to execute against the SAP BW. And then it has authentication modes with authenticating to the database with username, password, and windows for single sign-on. As you can see here, it's got connectors, system number, client ID, import or query mode, or direct query mode. Implementation, you want to use 2.0. It's not in beta anymore. It's language here, the execution mode you want to use, and the number batch size. And if it's import mode, you could put an MDX query here. Okay. If you want to connect to the message server, then here's the information is you put a server name, the system ID, client ID, and a login group. And you define if you want to do an import or a direct query mode. Now, the way SAP BW Connector connects to BW is through the OLAP BAPI interface, which means it goes through the OLAP BAPI interface to the MDX processor, to the OLAP processor, and then into BW. All third-party client tools connect through the OLAP BAPI. SAP tools connect directly to BICS. So you may see some performance differences between these two environments because this one has more layers to interact to SAP. But we have optimized the 2.0 connector to be as the most efficient connector of the third-party connectors in the market. So the 2.0 connector is built on top of the SAP.NET connector. It improves over the version 1 connector. It has about a 60 to 75% faster. Able to extract 20,000 records in less than 2 minutes, which would take the BW V1 connector 30 to 40 minutes to do. It could retrieve millions of records. You could also fine-tune it using batch size and execution modes. It does do compression for high latency connections or large data sets. You compress the data stream. Has better detection with data variables and better exception handling. And it does column folding, which I will discuss later. This is one of the performance characteristics that you want to ensure that you're doing to improve performance. And column folding is supported in these two different modes. That supports currency, units, and formatted values. So when you connect to SAP BW Navigator in Power BI, you could do only selected items, enable data preview, technical names you could pick, and key figures, characteristics and names, and then you have the option to load, which means it loads the data as is into Power BI, or you have the option to click Edit, which loads the data into Power BI Query, so you could transform it. In addition to that, Power BI with single sign-on and direct query supports SAP BW Variables, where a user could change the variables and resubmit the query with different variables, and Power BI and SAP returns the data based on those parameters. So in this case, you go to the options of Power BI Desktop, Direct Query, and enable users to change SAP variable for this report and the number of connections. When you do that, then from Power BI Desktop, and as well as from Power BI Service, you would edit query, edit variables, and then you put in the variable parameters and click OK, and it will requery the data based on those parameters. Let me show you where that capability exists. You will go to here and into options, and there you do it. Then when you enable that, you will get the capability to be able to edit variables here, as well as in the Power BI service. So what do these two connectors have in common? They are both cube connectors. They use DirectQuery over Power Query. And within Power Query, you can see all these M functions that allows you to operate against the analytics cubes of Power BI from Power BI from SAP BW. And you can see the function. So now let's do a quick demo of the SAP BW Connector connecting to BW. Okay. This is a sales dashboard from SAP BW. And that's before we get there, let's go here and let's show you the two different connectors that are available for SAP BW. Okay, so we have SAP, and you see there's a SAP Business Warehouse Application Server and the SAP Business Warehouse Messages Server they connect to. Okay, so we click on it and click connect. Now when I do that, I do need to have the SAP BW driver on this computer in order for it to connect. So when I do that, it prompts me for the information. Okay, and notice here I have server name, the system number, the client ID, import mode, direct mode, which version of the on the implementation you want to use, this 2.0 version. If you want to put an MDX statement, you have an option here. You could choose the mode. Okay, the BAS XML gzip is the compressed mode. You could choose the batch size, and that allows you to connect to the environment. Okay. Let's go into now looking at the sales dashboard from SAP BW. If I click refresh, you notice it's going to go and pull the cube. It's going to do a direct query and refresh the data for the cube. And because it's a direct query, the refresh means is the data actually is only the data it needs to support this navigation is retrieved and stored in memory of the Power BI desktop. Okay, so here you notice that I am doing direct query, so which means directly interacting with the SAP BW environment. So as I click anywhere, it's going to send a query to SAP BW. Okay, so if I add a filter, change a filter, it requeries the data. Okay, the other thing, okay, so which means is you could really have a lot of different visualizations here you could use. And let's maybe go into a different visualization. Maybe we could show a visualization like this, where so all these visualizations and more you can import are available in Power BI Desktop. Okay, let's just go ahead and refresh and pull the data back on. So what you saw here was a sales dashboard from SAP BW. The data is actually being pulled through a DirectQuery mode in real time. And it's really pulling data back in. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some tips and best practices. So when you're building your Power BI reports and you connect into the SAP connectors, either the SAP HANA or the SAP BW connectors, some of the things we have learned from lessons learned from the field, and I'm going to share with you here. First one is SAP Connectors for performance. If you want to get the most out of your multidimensional and DirectQuery mode, some of the typical issues you may run into is number of visuals on a page. If there's too many visuals on the page, it could make the performance of reports slower. One of the solution here is try to reduce the number of visuals in a single page. Another one would be when you have a HANA view with numerous joins and aggregation. You imagine if you're doing a direct query, every time the user navigates, is going to execute that view, which is going to execute those number of joins and those aggregations and return them to Power BI. A solution to that might be to materialize the HANA view where possible, so that it's aggregated. Another one might be when you do direct query, our direct query measures are created in Power BI. So which means is when you are retrieving the data and doing things like adding a new column or a distinct value, all that data needs to be returned to Power BI and aggregated inside Power BI, which means is Power BI becomes the source where it needs to do all this aggregation work. One way to avoid that is to create all your measures columns in HANA and return them as a single data stream. HANA is a big, heavy, powerful server that could more easily support those type of operations than pushing those operations to the Power BI service. Okay. Another thing that we learned was things like when you're authoring a report through Power BI Desktop, and you're adding the visuals, and as you add visual, you see the other ones again trying to get refreshed, are executing queries and slowing down your authoring experience, as previous visuals are executing queries against the data source. So 4 common examples that I'm going to describe here is that we have done to improve reporting authoring experience is when a visual generates a new query and a previous query hasn't finished, the previous query gets canceled. Okay, so you are able to add visuals without getting impacted by the previous queries. When hiding a visual, a running query that's on that hidden visual gets canceled. When you switch to another report, all the queries from the previous reports get canceled. And when you close the reports, it cancels the running queries. So other things you could do to improve report authoring experience is you go to the options of Power BI Desktop in the query reduction, and you could disable cross-highlighting filtering by default, or you could add apply buttons to all basic filters to change when you're ready to improve that kind of performance. So that's done inside of the Power BI service, Power BI desktop here. And if we go here and we go to options and click on options and go to query reduction, you'll see them there right here. Okay. Another way to improve performance is when, for example, when you have you're loading, you're in import mode, and you're loading very large amounts of data. Power BI has a time limit of 5 hours before it cancels that load. Also, a long-running load impacts both performance on the service, as well as makes the data takes a longer time for the data to get into the report, which means it takes longer before the report is available to the users. So a way to improve that would be to use incremental refresh. Incremental refresh means is that you could load just the incremental changes of your data every time. So refresh is faster by only loading the data that's only changed. You have a refresh is more reliable. It doesn't have to run for a very long time, and it reduces the consumption on the Power BI service. You would need to have a date range to accomplish that, to identify the data that's changed, and also be aware that how SAP HANA stores its data is year, month, day. So you want to make sure you are converted in that format. Using incremental refresh on a large data source with a large data load, it could reduce a data load from hours to minutes. And if you need additional information, you can find it here. Now about query folding. So there's two modes with SAP BW. Is to pull data in. It could actually push the query down to SAP to actually do the work and bring the result as a stream, or it could actually pull the data streams and join it together inside Power BI service. For performance, you want the query to be folded. You want the Power BI query to be submitted and processed completely in the Power BI from Power BI to the Power BI to the SAP BW environment, and return the result set with all the measures, columns, all already aggregated and summed, ready to be consumed by Power BI. So in essence, what we're doing, we're making the server do all the work, and the server is a bigger resource, has more resources behind it, more memory, more CPU to do that type of operation. So from performance perspective, you want to see a query folding scenario. When you don't see it, it's like this. When Power BI shows a table, means is the data it didn't fold, which means is streams of data was received by Power BI, and Power BI had to transform data. For example, added distinct value, added additional columns, measures into the data instead. So let me give you an example of when this happens. When if I go into Power BI here and I just go to the transform data, what I did in this case, I pulled in the SAP BW cube directly from SAP BW into Power BI, and you can see it folded, which means it's all of the work that needed to be done to transform that data source was done at the SAP BW server, and I just received a stream of data directly from it. If this was a table, it means that streams came in, and then I actually ended up doing additional transformations. Okay, so for performance perspective, you want to do all the transformation and work on the server side, and display it with Power BI because the server has more resources. So you want the query to be folding. Okay, a couple other things to note. If you run, if you have an out of memory scenario like this, SAP BW out of memory, one way to resolve this is to reduce the query size and do repetitive queries for different periods. Like, for example, in this case, you're querying by year week, and you're actually pulling each week independently into the Power BI query, instead of one large query. You're doing it into chunks. Another thing you could do also, you could also reduce or adjust the execution mode and batch size to reduce that out of memory. And then you might sometimes run into problems where you need to troubleshoot. For example, you might have a report that's running slow, and you're not sure if it's the MDX was slow, or the query is slow, or is it the Power BI visual or the Power BI transformation is slow. So it's a good way to be able to identify what to troubleshoot and what to optimize. One way to troubleshoot that is to use advanced tracing from Power BI. So you go to the File Option Settings, the Diagnostics, and you can set up a trace, and you could pull in the trace information of that. So let's kind of show you that. You go to Power BI, and we'll close that. Oops. And what you do is you're going to go into the you basically going to go into the trace here, enable option settings, and then you're just gonna enable trace, and you'll see as you'll see the a report with the trace log. Another thing you could also notice is that you could probably have a case where you want to ensure that the query, the MDX query, is performing well, or you want to look if you want to, or ways to optimize it. And one way you could do that to identify how it's performing is to use the MDX test. You could take this MDX query and run it and evaluate the performance of it, so you could improve it. For example, if you identified that the SAP BW query was running slow, you could use MDX query to profile it and tune it. Some additional information is you can go to my Azure Point Drive, which is here, and I do have additional recording of my presentations on these topics, and also have case studies, and it's all stored here. Also, if you need additional session resources, you have the SAP HANA Connector Overview, the HANA DirectQuery Multidimensional versus Relational, BW Connector Overview. This is a white paper that describes the Power BI connecting to SAP BW, and the single sign-on, as we spoke about how we single sign-on to SAP. Okay, I'd like to thank you for attending the session, and I hope it was very valuable to you.